Welcome back to Rewriting the Rules. You may be asking, what is the obedience hangover? Well, picture this. A dog sitting perfectly still beside their person, eyes focused, posture straight, waiting for the next cue. They're quiet, responsive, polite. Everything we've been told a good dog should be. And yet something feels missing. There's no sparkle in the eyes, no soft curiosity, and no hint of individuality, just obedience. This is what I call the obedience hangover. The quiet aftermath of a life spent trying to get everything right. It's the fatigue that settles in when a dog has learnt to comply but not to understand, when their mind is conditioned to wait for instruction rather than to explore, to feel, or to think for themselves. Many dogs today are living with this hangover, and many humans are too. Because obedience culture doesn't only train dogs, it trains people. It trains us to measure success by control. It convinces us that a good relationship is one where the human leads and the dog follows, neatly, quietly, without hesitation. But here's the question I want to ask you today. At what cost? Because when we prioritize obedience above all else, something beautiful gets lost. Choice, curiosity, confidence, and perhaps most importantly, relationship. This isn't an episode about obedience being bad. There's nothing wrong with teaching dogs skills that help them to live safely and harmoniously with us. But when obedience becomes the goal rather than a small part of a much deeper dialogue, we risk creating dogs who've learnt to perform peace instead of experiencing it. So in this episode, we're going to explore what happens when dogs and people live under obedience culture for too long. We'll talk about how we got here, what this hangover looks like, and most importantly, how to help our dogs and ourselves recover from it. Because a good dog isn't one who always obeys. It's one who feels free, understood, and safe enough to choose. To understand how we ended up here, in a world where a dog's value is often measured by how well they obey, we need to look at where obedience culture came from. The truth is, the way we think about training today didn't start from the family home. It started in the military. Modern obedience training traces its lineage back to the early 1900s, when dogs were used for war and law enforcement. They were expected to follow commands instantly and without hesitation, because hesitation could mean injury or death. Reliability and precision were not just preferred, they were essential. Those methods worked for the environments they were designed for, structured, high-stakes, command-based work. But what happened next is where things begin to blur. When soldiers and handlers returned home, those same principles, that same language of commands, compliance, and control trickled into civilian life. Books, television programs, and much later, social media built on this idea that a trained dog is an obedient one and that obedience equals success. The focus became clear. The human gives a cue, the dog obeys. The result is harmony. Except that harmony is often only surface deep. Dogs are not soldiers. They're sentient family members, emotional beings designed to communicate, negotiate, and express. But obedience culture doesn't leave much room for that. It tells us that listening to a dog's voice undermines authority, that empathy creates chaos, that the humans must always lead and the dogs must always follow. Even as dog training evolved from punishment-based methods to reward-based ones, the old framework still stayed intact. The language softened, but the structure remained. We still give cues, we still expect compliance, and we still praise performance. And in fairness, some of the structure is helpful. Cues can be useful when they're built on understanding. Boundaries are important for safety and cooperation. But the issue isn't the act of teaching, it's the intention behind it. When the goal becomes obedience for obedience sake, when we prioritize how something looks over how something feels, we drift back into the same dynamic the military created, control over communication. This is where so many well-intentioned guardians find themselves today. They may have been told that they're being kind and positive, but they still feel uneasy, because even when the methods are gentle, the structure can still silence the dog's voice. A dog who sits every time you stop walking isn't necessarily calm. A dog who stays still when they see another dog isn't necessarily comfortable. And a dog who follows every cue without hesitation isn't necessarily confident. They may simply have learnt that expressing themselves, moving, questioning, communicating brings pressure, confusion, or withdrawal of approval. That's the obedience hangover taking root. It's the quiet fatigue that comes from years of suppressing instinct in order to maintain peace. And humans feel it too, because when we live inside the same obedience model, always leading, always instructing, always holding ourselves responsible for perfect results, we forget that relationships are not built on precision, they're built on presence. The tragedy of obedience culture isn't that it taught us how to train, it's that it convinced us we needed to. It taught us to see natural emotional behavior as something to correct, rather than something to understand. It taught us to see chaos where there was simply communication, and perhaps most painfully, it taught us that love was best expressed through control. But love isn't meant to be controlled, it's meant to be shared. And that's where recovery begins, when we start to ask not, how can I make my dog listen, but how can I learn to listen to them? The obedience hangover doesn't usually appear suddenly. It creeps in quietly over time, like a tension that we only noticed once it starts to ache. At first, everything looks perfect. Your dog sits beautifully before crossing the road. They don't jump up on guests. They wait patiently before eating. And on the surface, it feels like you've done everything right. But then something begins to shift. Your dog hesitates before making decisions. They look at you for permission before doing almost anything, even something simple like sniffing a flower or exploring a new path. They freeze when they feel uncertain instead of trying to work things out for themselves. And over time, their natural curiosity starts to fade. You might even notice that their personality, the very spark that made them them, begins to dull. They seem compliant, but disconnected. Good, but not necessarily happy. This is one of the first signs of the obedience hangover. A dog who behaves beautifully, but no longer feels free. So let's look at the symptoms of the obedience hangover. One symptom is the permission seeker. These dogs have been taught, often unintentionally, that initiative isn't safe. They wait for direction, not because they want to please, but because they fear the consequence of acting independently, even if that consequence is simply confusion or disapproval. You might see this when they pause before getting on the sofa, or look at you before greeting another dog, even when it's safe to do so. They're always checking. Is it okay? Is this what you want? And while that might seem like politeness, it's actually a sign of deep internalized dependency. They've learnt that choice belongs to humans, not them. Another symptom is the silent dog. There's the dog who never protests, never growls, never argues. They're often praised as the easy one. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means suppression. A dog who never growls may have simply learnt that growling gets them ignored or corrected. A dog who doesn't communicate discomfort might have learnt that no one listens when they try, and so they stay quiet. But emotions don't disappear when they're suppressed. They only shift shape. Suppression turns into anxiety, anxiety into reactivity, reactivity into burnout. And when it finally surfaces, we call it a behavior problem, rather than the cry for help it truly is. Another symptom is the overachiever. This is the opposite side, the dog who's too enthusiastic, always ready to perform. They jump into behaviors before you even ask, because they've learnt that their worth is tied to performance. This is often seen in dogs who are highly trained in sport or obedience routines. They look confident, but it's a fragile confidence, one that depends on doing the right thing. The moment they get something wrong, they crumble. That's not confidence, it's compliance wrapped in anxiety. And it's not to say that every dog that's been trained in sport or obedience routines, but when they've been overtrained. Another symptom is the perfect until they're not dog. You may also see dogs who seem flawlessly obedient until they suddenly are not. They hold it together for hours, days, sometimes weeks, and then they explode. We call it regression or label it as stubborn. But really, it's the hangover hitting hard. Imagine trying to suppress your emotions day after day, always smiling, always being agreeable, never showing frustration or confusion. Eventually, the pressure builds and it bursts. Dogs feel that too. It's not disobedience, it's relief. And another symptom is our side, because then there's us. Because obedience culture affects people as much as dogs. The constant vigilance. Did I reward at the right time? Did I miss the signal? Should I correct this? The guilt when something goes wrong. The exhaustion of trying to manage every outcome. It's no wonder so many people feel burnt out. We've been told that good guardians control everything, but that's not partnership, it's pressure. And here's the difficult truth. Sometimes we confuse obedience with safety, when what we really crave is trust. But trust doesn't grow in control, it grows in freedom. And that's why the obedience hangover can be such a wake-up call. It's not just about your dog's fatigue, it's about your own. It's about recognizing that control isn't the only path to harmony. Sometimes it's the barrier to it. One of the hardest things about the obedience hangover is that most people don't even realize it's there. Because from the outside, obedience looks good. It looks calm. It looks in control. And when we see a dog behave imperfectly, we're told that this is success, that this is what a good relationship looks like. But that's precisely what makes it so deceptive. Because the hangover doesn't show itself in chaos, it hides in compliance. We live in a culture that celebrates how things look. We praise the dog who walks neatly beside their person. And we feel embarrassed by the one who pulls towards another dog or stops to sniff for too long. We applaud silence. We correct vocalization. We admire stillness. And we label movement as over-arousal. But the truth is, obedience often tells us more about human comfort than canine well-being. A calm-looking dog might be deeply anxious but suppressed. A quiet dog might be shut down. A well-behaved dog might simply be performing. And because this performance aligns so neatly with our cultural idea of control, it feels rewarding, even admirable. That's how obedience culture sustains itself, because it looks like progress. And then there's the influence of social media. We see perfectly edited clips of dogs responding instantly to cues, walking off lead beside their guardian through the busy streets, and lying quietly in cafes for hours. These images and short clips are shared thousands of times, captions with words like relationship, trust, connection. But what we're often seeing isn't connection, it's conditioning. We're witnessing compliance, polished and filtered until it resembles what looks like peace. It's easy to forget that the dog didn't get a say in the edit. And when we compare our real, messy, emotional dogs to those highlight reels, we start to believe that something is wrong with us. We start to tighten our grip, micromanage more, until both we and our dogs are living in a constant state of quiet pressure. That's not freedom. That's performance anxiety. And reward-based training isn't immune to this. Even in the world of force-free and reward-based training, which has done so much to replace pain with kindness, obedience culture still lingers. Because it isn't just about the tools we use, it's about the mindset behind them. If our goal is still to control outcomes, to shape behavior rather than understand it, we're still playing the same game, just with softer edges. We might use treats instead of corrections, but the dynamic can still be transactional. Do what I ask and you'll get something you want. And when the dog hesitates, when they choose differently, we label it as non-compliance or low motivation. We forget that maybe they're just communicating. That doesn't mean the rewards are bad, far from it. They can be ethical, joyful, and deeply supportive. But they can also be used to silence emotion if we're not careful. That's why awareness matters more than method, because true connection can't be measured in treats or cues. It's measured in choice. And why is this so hard emotionally? We need to talk about the emotional side, because letting go of obedience culture isn't just a philosophical shift, it's personal. So many of us, obedience feels safe. It gives structure, predictability, control. It helps us to feel competent, especially in a world where everything feels uncertain. So when someone questions it, or when the dog doesn't respond as expected, it can feel like an attack on our identity, like we're being told that we're failing. But you're not failing, you're awakening. Recognizing the obedience hangover doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It means you're ready to do something different. Because dogs don't need perfection, they need presence. They don't need flawless cues, they need understanding. And they don't need to obey to belong, because they already do. So how do we recover from the obedience hangover? Recovery doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't mean throwing everything away that you've learnt. It means learning to see things through a new lens, a softer one, a more accurate one, where obedience is replaced by understanding and control by communication. For many of us, the first step in recovery is realizing that our dogs don't need to earn freedom, affection, or safety. They already deserve it. When you begin teaching from that place, when you choose dialogue over direction, something begins to shift. Your dog stops performing and starts participating. And for the first time, you'll really see them. Not the version of them that training created, but truly who they are. Step 1 is to slow down and observe. Before you change anything, start by simply watching. Observing is where real communication begins. Notice when your dog looks for you for permission. How often does that happen? Notice when they make independent decisions. How do you feel in those moments? Do you tense up when they take initiative, or do you smile? Because that reaction tells you a lot, not just about them, but about your own comfort with letting go. Observation isn't passive, it's active empathy. It says, I'm listening before I respond, and that single shift in energy is enough to start the healing process. Step 2 is to rebuild curiosity. Dogs are natural curious beings. They're explorers, not performers. But when they've lived in an obedience-centered world, curiosity can fade. To rebuild it, offer moments that ask for nothing. Go for walks with no expectations, no cues, no direction. Just follow. Let them lead for once. Watch where they go, what they notice, what made them pause. It might surprise you how different the world looks when you see it through their eyes. This doesn't mean letting go of all structure. It just means rediscovering balance. A few moments of choice within a predictable framework can do wonders for a dog's confidence and independence. Step 3 is to reinstate dialogue. Dialogue is what sits at the heart of the CDD method. It's not about giving cues and waiting for the correct answer. It's about creating a conversation. When your dog hesitates, ask questions through tone and body language. Ask them, are you okay? Would you like to? Shall we try something else? Dialogue means recognizing that both you and your dog are participants, not performers. What you're building isn't compliance, it's connection. When a dog realizes that their voice matters, they stop needing to shout. Anxiety softens, frustration fades, and learning becomes organic again. Step 4 is redefining calmness. Many people mistake suppression for calmness, a quiet dog for a content one. But real calmness isn't the absence of movement. It's the presence of safety. You'll know when your dog's calm, when they choose to relax, not when they're told to. When they sigh deeply beside you, not because they're exhausted from restraint, but because they feel safe enough to let go. Recovery is about nurturing the state through trust, not through technique. Step 5 is to let go of the image. The obedience hangover thrives on image. The tidy walks, the quiet dogs, the illusion of constant control. Recovery means unlearning that pressure. You don't have to impress anyone. You don't have to prove your worth for your dog's behavior. If your dog barks, it's communication, not failure. If they hesitate, it's thought, not defiance. And if they pull towards something exciting, it's joy, not rebellion. When you begin to see behavior through that lens, guilt begins to dissolve, and what replaces it is compassion for both of you. And finally, step 6 is to relearn together. This one is the most beautiful, learning together without hierarchy. Try teaching new words through gentle narration rather than commands. Share daily moments, preparing food, opening doors together, finding routes as opportunities for shared learning. Because dogs don't want to obey us, they want to belong with us. And belonging grows through mutual learning, not dominance or direction. This is where the obedience hangover truly fades, when both you and your dog realize you never needed to control each other to feel safe. You only needed to listen. So if you've been feeling that quiet exhaustion, the sense that despite all the effort, something still doesn't feel right, know that you're not alone. You're not failing. You're simply waking up from a cultural spell that told you obedience was the highest form of love. But love isn't about silence, stillness, or compliance. It's about relationship. It's about learning together through dialogue, empathy, and trust. And that's what the CDD method offers, a path out of obedience and into understanding. So if you're listening to this and realizing that maybe, just maybe, your dog has been living in a quiet version of this hangover, please take a deep breath. You haven't broken anything. You've built something that simply needs space to breathe again. This isn't about throwing away your knowledge or your skills. It's about rediscovering the why behind them. It's about remembering that behavior isn't a reflection of your worth or your dog's obedience. It's a reflection of emotion, communication, and trust. If your dog hesitates, don't rush in with cues or fixes. Pause, listen, because that hesitation might be the beginning of dialogue, the first step out of obedience and into understanding. Let go of perfection. Let go of image. Let go of the need for control that exhausts you both. And instead, start asking questions. Do you feel safe? Would you like to? What do you need? It might surprise you how much your dog has to say when they finally realize you're truly listening. Because the real art of teaching isn't found in control, it's found in conversation. It's found in the pauses between words, in the looks you share on a walk, in the trust that says you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you. Next week, we'll be exploring the myth of socialization, one of the most widely misunderstood concepts in modern dog culture. We'll be breaking down where the term came from, how it's often misused, and what true social development actually looks like. Because socialization isn't just about exposure, it's about emotional safety, consent, and the right kind of connection. So if you've ever been told that your dog needs more socialization, or you felt the pressure to make them fit into a mold, this next episode will help you to see it differently. Thank you for listening, for questioning, and for being brave enough to look beyond what's familiar. You are part of a growing community of people choosing heart over habit, dialogue over direction, and love over control. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might be stuck in the obedience hangover without even realizing it yet. Together, we can rewrite the rules, one conversation at a time. See you next Thursday.